So we're continuing our discussion now of how a parent grid can send a command to a child grid. So the first two lines here are pretty easy. It's just getting the row number of the current row in the grid that has focus and then getting the value of the sales rep field from that row. So now we have this value sales rep here, which is the value that we want to write into the child. So now we need to construct this grid object name programmatically. So we know that the grid.component name placeholder is the alias of the parent grid. So grid 1 there is replaced with grid.component name. Then we have underbar R over there. Then we have the row number of the current row that has focus, which happens to be row num over there. So we end our string and then add in the JavaScript variable row number. And then we go plus G1 because we know that this is going to be the first grid in the row expander that we want to set the value of, and then underbar grid obj. So obj name now is the name of the child grid object that we want to talk to. So we just alert that over there. Now we need to know what the row number is of the current row in the child grid. So we just call window obj name. So this is how we reference a global JavaScript variable by looking inside the window namespace. So window obj name gives us a pointer now to that child grid, and then we just read the underbar selected row property and we just alert that there as well. And then finally we call the set value method of that child grid, setting the product ID in the row that currently has focus to the value of sales rep that we read from the parent grid. So let's run through that one more time now. So I'm going to open up, for example, row 3 now over here, give focus over there to say row 2, and now when I click this button I should be writing ito into that field over there. So here we go. And in fact I did. So what we've done now is send a command from the parent grid to the child grid. Now the technique that I've described here of constructing this child grid name on the fly by understanding the naming convention that Alpha 5 has used is not my favorite technique, because it relies on understanding the naming convention that Alpha 5 applies, and there's a naming convention that is used for row expanders and a slightly different row expansion that would be used for linked content sections. So next what I'm going to discuss is a method whereby the child grid can publish its object name in some shared global JavaScript variable that the parent grid can see. So we're going to now discuss that different technique. So you can see now that we've actually opened up the invoice items grid. This is the child grid in the row expander. And what we've done over here is in the on-grid render complete, we're actually going to put the alias of this grid inside a global JavaScript variable called underbar child1 ID. So if we were to go now and run this, running it now as not as a child of any other grid, but just running it as a parent grid, you can see now that there's grid 1, which is the default alias for this grid. So now basically what we've done is we know that the alias of this child grid is going to be available in this global JavaScript variable. So let's just copy this global variable now to the clipboard. So Control C and then save that, and now go and open up the invoice header again. And then now instead of calling this code over here, what I'm going to do is reference that global variable. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video.